Welcome into the Sportsmemo College Football Every Game on the Board podcast, where myself and Rob Veno will go right down the card, hitting on every college football game from 103-104 North Carolina, Miami tomorrow night, all the way down to rotation number 143-144 Virginia, NC State, and then we'll start it up tomorrow with the rest of the card. But without further ado, our guest today, Rob Veno. Welcome to the show, Robbie.
Glad to be here. Drew, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Robbie. Excited to get your opinion on the top of this card here for this weekend. And before we get to that, just want to say a couple stats here, man. You're actually killing it this year, big time. 15-1 blue chip best bets in college football and NFL. That's the streak you're on. Those are the plays 15-star and 20-star plays, your best bets. And also, year-to-date, you're up almost 10 units in college football and the NFL out of the gate. How's it feel?
It feels great when you're winning, Drew. We know that. Certainly things have gone real well. You'd like to say that off-season preparation really helps to get off to a real hot start. But we know that these games are, funny sometimes, and sometimes all the preparation in the world doesn't help. But so far, things have gone our way. Still looks, pretty good to me as I look at stuff. I'm pulling stuff off that seems very, very winnable. So we think we're getting the best of numbers here each and every week. And, we'll try to continue that. Put a play out yesterday for the NFL because we were looking to get the best of a number on Thursday night. But to be up 10 units this early in the season without September even gone by yet is fantastic.
Yeah, congrats to you, Robbie. And also want to give a shout-out to your baseball as well. You're up 21 units on the season, which is a feat in itself. That's on a 1 and 2 unit scale, guys. And he does have a play going today at sportsmemo.com. And, of course, it's Wednesday, so it's $9 Wednesday. You can get his 15-star best bet, blue chip bet in MLB for only $9 today. So check that out at sportsmemo.com. Robbie, let's get right into it. A good one in the ACC here, 103-104 North Carolina at Miami, a game I think I'm going to be going to tomorrow night. 55 the total, 17.5 right now. Miami laying at home at Chris. Looks like 18 at most other books. How you looking to bet this one, Robbie?
Well, it's an interesting spot because UNC gets so many of their suspended players back. A lot of suspensions served, including that of quarterback Chaz Surratt, who's not going to start this game. Nathan Elliott, who's been the starter all along, will retain his starting status. We'll see if Surratt gets a chance to get into this one. But just the fact, like Larry Fedora has said this week, that they finally have depth. They were out 17 players, whether suspended or injured, off of their roster in that ECU upset. Came back last week, played pretty well against Pittsburgh, good enough to win 38-35 in a meaningful Coastal Division game. So now to have some reinforcements finally, it's almost like North Carolina's been on the ropes, taking some punches. They've survived them, and now we'll see if they can make a little bit of a move here in another important Coastal Division game inside the ACC against Miami, which has been phenomenal. If I just line them up fundamentally, Drew, defensively, Miami has been so good. And I know people's, because most of the Miami games so far this season have kind of been off the grid after that LSU game. They haven't played the best in competition, and there's been some weather complications along the way. So I think the lasting impression of Miami for most people is that LSU game in which, after it was over, it was assumed, LSU crushed that team. But we've gone over it here on the podcast. When you break it down statistically, Miami played very well in that contest, just got behind early and couldn't make up the ground. And LSU has turned out to be a force. So I don't think that Miami's defensive statistics, 79 rushing yards allowed per game, 224 total yards per game, are fraudulent. Miami's a real good defense this year. Probably be tested more so Thursday than they have been for the most part this year, but still like their defense. I think the point spread here, though, is too much. I can make fundamental cases for Miami all I want, but to lay 18 points in this game, I think is an overlay, and I would be more than willing to grab the points with North Carolina in this one, figuring that as far as rotation depth in Miami and what figures to be a hot situation tomorrow night would help North Carolina a little bit. Power ratings made the game Miami of Florida 16.5.
And Robbie, I've heard Perry might get the start, the redshirt freshman, so they might be making a change at quarterback here. He came in against FIU through 2 touchdown, or at least led them down 2 touchdown drives against FIU, and it sounds like Wright is being kind of hum-ho about who's going to start, but do you think that could affect anything for Miami?
Well, it looks right now that Perry seems to be the better passer of the two, right? Rozier, I guess, is how Malik pronounces his last name now. I've said Rozier for a couple of years now, but I guess it's Rozier from what I hear. He left it. Perry came in what was a scripted situation last week, scripted to come in third series of the game, did so well in that third series that he never went out of the game again. 67% completions. Miami's had trouble with accuracy at the quarterback position the last couple of seasons. A lot of that due to some wide receiver injuries. It looks to us right now as if they may get both wide receivers back for this game. Amon Richards becomes still the question mark guy for Miami, but Perry looks to be the guy, if you read between the lines, that'll get this start. He'll have Jeff Thomas back at wide receiver tomorrow. Mark Richt, like you say, he's being a little bit coy here, Drew, but from what we've seen throwing the football so far, looks like Perry brings a little bit more to the table.
Robbie, moving on to Friday night, we got 105-106 Memphis, Tulane, and AAC battle here, with Memphis laying 13.5 on the highway. Looks like 66.5 the total. Robbie, these are 2 clash of styles here. Memphis is going to go throw it around a little up-tempo. Tulane, more of the option attack and kind of hold on to the ball under Willie Fritz. How do you think that fares in what the Big Easy on Friday night?
Yeah, I think they have to do it, Drew. Just if you take one glance at the Tulane pass defense so far this year, you would assume right off the bat that Memphis is going to have a field day through the air in this contest. 304 yards allowed per game by the Tulane Green Wave through the air. Now, they faced Ohio State and Wake Forest, who can throw the football, but Nicholls State and UAB are the other 2 opponents there, so it's not like Tulane has played a 4-game who's who of aerial attacks here. To allow 304 yards per game through the air really speaks lowly of that pass defense that Memphis can exploit. Memphis won a game last week, Drew, really not showing up until the second half of the contest offensively, where they put up 31 points and kind of pulled away in the end. So I'd expect them to be ready. The other side of that coin, like you said, Willie Fritz's offense, can they control the ball? And I have a feeling that they can here against Memphis. For me, Memphis's defense, the numbers, I just talked about Miami's overall numbers through 4 games. I didn't think they were skewed because of the way they played, but I think Memphis's might be a little bit skewed here, and they may get run on. I've been waiting all season long, as I think a lot of people have, for Jonathan Banks and this Tulane offense, which Willie Fritz bragged about in the offseason, to really take off. Could be here. When I look at Memphis games, Drew, and I don't know about yourself, but whenever I look at a Memphis game, the starting point for me is, can they get over the total? In this particular contest, it opened 65.5. It's been bet up to 66.5. If you think Tulane's going to take a lot of time off the clock, you're probably leery of going over. But I think Memphis can be victimized by big plays even in the running game. So we still may be able to get there on the total in this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept to think, because that's the handicap. If Tulane is able to get long drives being at home against the Memphis defense that they could be able to run the ball on, it's almost like this number at 13.5 and maybe the under at 66 makes sense. But at the same time, this one jumped off the board at me as at the number's not big enough because of that Memphis offense, and they can really kind of press the pedal there and make 13.5 look pretty small. So it can go one of 2 ways. I see a lot of volatility in this one, Robbie.
I would agree. And, the great counter argument in modern day college football handicapping against running type possession style teams, Drew, is when they're playing an opposite side that can strike in 90 seconds. I mean, Memphis is one of those teams that they don't need a lot of possession time. They could put up 40 points in 19 minutes. So no matter how much time you grind off the clock, you can still get to an over because the other team is capable of scoring 4 plays, minute and a half, 5 plays, minute 50. So that's what makes it a little bit tricky here. We'll see. I think the read for me is whether or not the Memphis defense is as good as the numbers indicate, and I'm not so sure it is.
Robbie, we got the late night on Friday night. UCLA traveling to Boulder to take on the Colorado Buffaloes. Looks like 60.5 the total. Colorado laying 8.5, which has been bought down. It was at 10, I believe, yesterday. So 8.5 showing at Chris. How'd you look to bet this Pac-12 affair?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting game because for the Colorado Buffaloes this season, the offense has, Darren Shiverini, the offensive coordinator for this team, a former wide receiver, but he's one of those firm believers in running a play every 15, 17 seconds, and you just have to believe that in Boulder, in the thin air, against an extremely young, freshman all over the place for UCLA type of squad, that the pace of the game is going to get to that defensive side of the football. Whether it gets to them right away from the opening kickoff, which it does, and it has so far this season to some teams, or whether it takes a little bit of time, remains to be seen. But I don't think there's any way that UCLA can slow this thing down or stop that Colorado offense. Now, of course, the other side of that equation is, can this freshman team with a few games under their belt now, I think both of these teams, if I'm right, Drew, had a bye week last week. So you're talking about two teams that'll be rested and game prepared. You've had 2 weeks as head coach to go over the other team in this instance. I'd expect them to be ready game plan wise. But once that first play is done, I think all bets are off at that point. And I think Colorado's offense overwhelms UCLA here. But again, Thompson Robinson at quarterback for UCLA and that offense, I'm interested to see any adjustments Chip Kelly might have made that could surprise Colorado here. Again, I kind of looked at this game from a totals standpoint, and right now we're looking at, a number of 60.5, which to me could be a little bit low. UCLA might have some stuff up their sleeve here where they, like I say, they can surprise Colorado with the 2 weeks preparation.
Robbie, we move on to Saturday's card. We got 109-110, Army at Buffalo. Two teams that I would say have been surprising to the good side so far this year. Army looks like catching 7.5 on the road at Buffalo, 54.5 the total. You think Buffalo can handle this Army option attack, Robbie?
Well, I think that maybe if we just get away from the fundamental angle of it for a second and we just look at the situational, we'll see if Army has – and it's a service academy, so I always give them the benefit of the doubt, but you are off an overtime game against Oklahoma, a top 5 team in the country, where you almost pulled a huge upset on the road. Does Army get right back up and come in with the same focus? Like I say, the Service Academy teams, I think they're so well disciplined that I always like to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they're going to come right back up against a very quick strike offense. Maybe that benefits Army, Drew. Maybe the fact that Army just ran around the field covering all the offensive options that Oklahoma has and all the quick strike ability that Oklahoma has, maybe that helps them in this game against Buffalo, where they can strike as quickly as anybody, and where Tyree Jackson, the quarterback of the Buffalo Bulls, is certainly making a name for himself amongst NFL scouts right now. We're going to see him move way up the draft board as this season goes on. And the fact that they've developed 2 home run hitter wide receivers now, Anthony Johnson we all knew, but KJ Osborne's come through. It's a lot for Army to handle 2 weeks in a row. Buffalo's been severely untested, I think, so far. The record is great. They're 4-0. They performed well. But Delaware State and Rutgers, you can throw those 2 games away. Those were two teams that really can't put up much of a fight. So you look to the Temple and Eastern Michigan games to get a true read on Buffalo. And you know what? Those two have pretty solid defenses, and Buffalo put up 35 and 36 against both of those. Got to figure they're going to do the same here. I don't know that I could go much higher than 7.5 with Buffalo, but I think this number at 54.5 for a total is really, to me, in a Buffalo game, pretty low. I mean, Temple doesn't have much in the way of offense, and Buffalo dragged them all the way to 65. Eastern Michigan doesn't have much in the way of offense, and Buffalo dragged them all the way to 63. So 54.5 here with Army. Like we said before, ball control or not, when you're playing these teams that can hit home runs quickly, you have to consider 54.5 going over the total.
Robbie, we've got 111, 112, Cincy, Connecticut. Looks like the Bearcats laying 17 on the highway, 59.5 the total in stores.
Yeah, boy, poor UConn. I mean, I shouldn't say poor UConn, but they're so freshman-dominated on that defensive side. They just can't stop anybody. 664 total yards per game allowed. I mean, if you just take that one statistic, Drew, to start a handicap in this game, Cincinnati allowing 274 yards per game, UConn 664. 390 more yards per game allowed by the UConn Huskies. It would lead you right to Cincinnati. Now, Luke Fickell had a close call a couple of weeks ago, but to me, and I think you and I have talked about this before, the recruiting job that he's done since he took over at Cincinnati is really starting to pay dividends now. They're kind of a traditional style team where they want to run it and pound it down your throat. UConn's not allergic to giving up rush yards. They'll give up pass yards, rush yards, either or. So I think since he can move the ball here, question's going to be whether or not UConn has enough in them to come close to the number. And I can't play them right now. I mean, simple analysis of this game, I can't play UConn right now just about at any price. And I'll tell you the truth, this line to me, Drew, is padded. Power rating showed it to be 13.5, and we're looking at 17.5, like you mentioned. Immediately, you should see some value in Connecticut, but just their play on the field, I can't get there right now.
Yeah, the Huskies are a tough one to back this year. We got 113, 114. CMU, Central Michigan at Michigan State. Looks like 46 the total. Sparty's laying 29 at home.
Yeah, not going to say a lot about this one, Drew. I think Michigan State last week had a big game in front of them. They came through with that win over Indiana. If you're just looking for classic situational underdogs, maybe Central Michigan is that underdog because Michigan State comes off an extremely important Indiana game. And on deck, they have another Big Ten conference game against Northwestern. In between is Little Central Michigan. It's very possible that their top running back, Michigan State's L.J. Scott, doesn't go here one more time. So I think they'll probably do enough to get by and look forward to what's happening the week after against Northwestern rather than put all their energy into this. I think, like I say, situationally it's a classic spot for a 28-point underdog to lose the game but come through point spread-wise. Central Michigan's going to go in there, and they've got enough equipment to stay within that number. And what we've seen so far out of the Michigan State offense, I don't think that would encourage anybody to run out and lay 28 with them. You know, you got to score an awful lot to cover 28 points, and just don't know that right now Michigan State is clicking on enough cylinders to do that. And then when I throw the situation in with that, I think that the underdog probably looks like a pretty good play.
Robbie, we'll stay in the state of Michigan. We got Northern Illinois traveling to Eastern Michigan. Looks like 48.5 the total, with EMU laying 3.5 at home. Big game, Western Division, but I do worry somewhat about the travel and, again, the overtime aspect of this game, Drew. We talked about Army going all the way to Norman, Oklahoma, almost pulling the upset. How about Eastern Michigan last week? All the way to the West Coast. They get down early. They come back, and they lose a very, very tough, heartbreaking loss in overtime at San Diego State. Now travel back home and have to get ready for a Western Division matchup here against Northern Illinois, a very important one. Eastern Michigan, to me, right now on paper, is the equivalent of Northern Illinois at this point. So I would think that at home I would look their way, but that situation kind of bothers me a little bit. NIU, for what it's worth, has been through the ringer so far. Northern Illinois has played Iowa, outstanding defense, Utah, outstanding defense, Florida State, a team that certainly they're outmanned by talent-wise.
3 of their 4 games have been against those 3 teams, so they're more than ready to play this one against Eastern Michigan. I just don't like the spot Eastern Michigan is in. Preseason-wise, I think most would have said that Northern Illinois was the better team this coming into this season. They've been somewhat of a disappointment so far, but I think that this might be a good spot for them. I mean, for the head coach to be able to rally the troops around a conference game. They're already 1-0 inside the division. 2-0 would be huge if they get it here. Might not play it, Drew, but I just have the feeling that Northern Illinois is in a better spot than Eastern Michigan is here.
Yeah, I like that. The travel spot for sure. I mean, out there late night on the West Coast against a team they did play well against, but have to come all the way back, playing against Northern Illinois, whose defense has been solid so far. So it should be a good one. Now you're going to have to lay 3 and the hook if you're looking to bet Eastern Michigan. Staying in the MAC, we got Kent State, Ball State. 65 the total. Looks like Ball State laying anywhere from 7 to 8. This is a good one to shop around at different sports books if you're looking to bet on either team. But anyway, Robbie, how are you looking to bet Kent versus Ball State?
You know, just a quirk, I guess, Drew, through 4 games. But I just found it interesting that 3 of the Ball State games, final scores, have all landed on 48. 48 against Central Connecticut, 48 against Indiana, 48 against Western Kentucky. Only 40 in a 24-16 loss to Notre Dame. 48 seems to be a key number there. But when you look even further, because that number kind of surprised me, seemed low with the offensive threats that they have with Riley Neal and James Gilbert. If you look at them offensively, they're averaging 438 yards per game. So pretty good offense. And, you know, to get near 350 against the Indiana defense and the Notre Dame defense, not too shabby either. So to me, it's interesting that they're not putting more points up on the board with the yardage that they're racking up here. At some point in time, that yardage is going to add up to points. It could start right here against the Kent defense that's been an absolute sieve all season long. But again, you know, we talked about this last week. Kent's new Bowling Green, Dino Babers style offense, where they just rattle off plays, has really produced some offense for them. Last week in that Mississippi game, the Ole Miss game where there was a huge weather delay, Kent State still gets off another 84 plays. I mean, they're just going to come at you and run plays and run plays and run plays. And they're fairly effective on the offensive side of the football. They've had some tough opponents so far as well, non-conference. So to me, this one adds up to a higher scoring affair than what the odds makers see it as so far. I think that the quarterback play here will be very solid. I think both of these defenses will be a bit overwhelmed. Odds makers opened at 57, and then you see the opinion of the money come out full force, driving it all the way to 64.5 and 65. We've had a touchdown or touchdown plus move on the total on this game. Can't say that I disagree. Like I say, Kent for years has had the offensive philosophy of, you know, very sluggish, turtle-like, and this year that's all changed with the up-tempo offense. And I think that there's some out there that aren't generally following college football every single day, and certainly there's those out there who don't follow the MAC that were slow to transfer their opinion on Kent State's offense, but certainly that's not the case anymore. You can see that in the total up to 64.5.
Right, we've got a battle here of 2 of the smaller schools in FBS football, by enrollment anyway. Rice at Wake Forest. Looks like the Demon Deacons laying 25.5 at home, 66.5 the total.
Well, Jay Sawvell got fired, defensive coordinator for Wake Forest. That was big news Sunday morning. Obviously, the Wake Forest defense has been atrocious so far this season. The offense really has enough weapons to win a lot of ball games, Drew. The quarterback play has been phenomenal, although Sam Hartman left the game last week hurt. I think he's going to be okay. Despite that, even if he couldn't go this week, Kendall Hinton is now back after serving his suspension, the perceived starting quarterback to start the year. Wake Forest they're really 3 deep at quarterback right now. So I don't think they'll have any problem there. The problem is going to be, can you cover this type of number with the defense that you throw on the field against a Rice offense that under Mike Bloomgren has been really impressive so far. I didn't think they were going to be this good. I didn't think they were going to be able to generate this many points, this many yards, running a Stanford-style offense down in Houston. But you know what? Rice has been able to do it. And Wake Forest, like I say, so many holes on the defensive side of the football. A lot of them, most of them, come through the air. We saw Ian Book absolutely torch the Wake Forest defense last week. It was great for me. I sat there, with a 20-star on the over, and it was over in the middle of the third quarter. Once Notre Dame started scoring, they never stopped, and Wake Forest could match a little bit all the way up to 4 touchdowns. They got to 27. So I could see this game, again, being pretty high scoring. Rice doesn't have the ability to stop Wake Forest, and Wake Forest transitioning defense right now, at this point in the season, I don't think that bodes well. Generally speaking, when this type of thing happens, defensive coordinators getting fired, it doesn't get better for the remainder of the season. What's even stranger, Drew, is to the best of my knowledge, there's been no defensive coordinator named, no interim DC named for this team. From what head coach Dave Clawson said, it's just going to be a collective effort of defensive assistants. I don't know how that works, and maybe they, name one this afternoon, or maybe I just missed it. But to me, having a bunch of guys who's going to call the defense, I really don't know. I'm sure they have that all figured out. But to me, this looks like both offenses should have a real good day.
Yeah, Robbie, I mean, in today's college football where you got to have your defensive play ready pretty quickly, that sounds like it might not go over too well having to communicate with a bunch of people. You kind of need one, maybe 2 people really calling the defensive scheme. But anyway, we'll move on. 1-2-1, 1-2-2, ODU at ECU. We got Old Dominion at East Carolina. Regional rivalry here, 62 the total. Looks like East Carolina laying 7 at home. This is an ODU team that just beat, a top 20 team in Virginia Tech. What are they doing catching 7 to one of the bottom-tier teams in all of FBS, Robbie?
Yeah, if you're going to brag about how well your 20-star play performed last week, you might as well admit how lousy one of your 15 stars performed last week, because I thought Virginia Tech would have their way with the 0-3 ODU squad, and I watched that game from start to finish, and I mean Old Dominion torched that Virginia Tech defense. Now, that's a defense that heading into the season, especially in the secondary, we knew due to defections, whether they be supplemental draft, whether they be injury, whether they be transfer, that secondary was going to be tested this year. I think Virginia Tech knew it. Justin Fuente knew it. Bud Foster knew it. But then they came out opening night against Florida State and shut down that Florida State offense. And I think, some sort of expectations for that defense were created after that game. Oh, it's just another Bud Foster defense. He can work with any pieces. It doesn't matter. It mattered last week because I'll give you 2 names, Jonathan Duhart and Travis Fulgham. Those are 2 wide receivers for Old Dominion. You see them on the field. I think they're 7 and 9 number-wise, and they shredded that defense. They were open all day long. Quarterback Blake LaRussa for the Old Dominion Monarchs was on target with everything in that game. And it seemed to me, Drew, that in watching that game, there was I know it's in-state, and for Old Dominion, it's a monster game. But just general observation of that team during that performance, it looked like it was a real confidence builder. Like, no way we should have been 0-3. This looked to me like it's got some carryover into this week and for the remainder of the season in Conference USA play. Going to go up against an ECU defense that's been somewhat improved. Certainly the change in tactics on the defensive side of the football to become far more aggressive, to simplify things, they've helped. But I don't know that they're good enough to keep Old Dominion quiet for the majority of this game. The biggest problem for ODU, when you're a 28-point underdog and you outright upset a team inside your own state, a team that's viewed as the 1 or 2 best inside your state, that's Cloud 9 type of material. And how quickly can they get back up for this conference game against East Carolina? We'll see. Or no, non-conference game, excuse me. But East Carolina, to me too, Drew, they've looked fairly improved as well. 2 teams on the upswing. I don't know if I could lay 7.5 with ECU, though. One thing's for sure, the ball is going to be winged all over the lot in this particular contest. East Carolina throws it around, so does ODU. Should be a pretty good matchup.
Yeah, I kind of like this over, too. As we move down, we got 1-2-3, 1-2-4, Bowling Green at Georgia Tech. Kind of contrasting styles here as well, Robbie. We got Tech laying 28.5 at Bobby Dodd, 66 the total.
Simply brutal on the defensive side. I think Paul Johnson knew some of that heading into this year. The overall statistics as far as yardage are concerned don't show it. I think they're somewhat skewed because of a couple of opponents. But here's the biggie in this game, Drew. You can't enter a game against Georgia Tech and that option attack allowing 335 yards on the ground per contest. That just doesn't work. Bowling Green is going to get run over by Georgia Tech. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of those games where Georgia Tech is a favorite that punts maybe once or 0 times in the entire game. To lay 28.5, of course, you have to be able to stop the other side, and Bowling Green has offensive weaponry for sure. I just wonder if they're going to be able to stay in this thing long enough. I mean, you're always concerned about a late fourth quarter touchdown if you're playing the favorite in a game like this, and I would go along with that concern because Georgia Tech's defense isn't good, but I just don't know how Bowling Green ever stops them. I could see Georgia Tech finding their way all the way to 56 points in this game, and for Bowling Green, that means you got to make it to 28. Not so sure that they do.
Yeah, Bowling Green, their offense is pretty good. I could see that backdoor being open as well, Robbie. We got 1-2-7, 1-2-8. Temple at Boston College. Looks like BC laying 13.5 at home to an improved Temple team, 53.5 the total.
Yeah, last couple of weeks, I mean, Temple, to start the year, looked like Jeff Collins might be in trouble. Then they come back, they pull an upset, and they come back last week and play real good again. Defensively, they've been solid. I'm interested in this one, Drew, though, because the power ratings that I keep really show Boston College to be a lot better line-wise than what we're showing right now. I have Boston College a 19.5-point favorite in this game. We're seeing 13.5 out there. That's with some movement toward Temple because the game opened 14.5. But I want to see how Temple stacks up against Boston College's offensive line, against Boston College's running game with A.J. Dillon. For me, I'm not totally sold as of right now on the Temple passing game. I like the fact that it's become more vertical under this regime. They do throw the ball downfield a lot more, and they're not totally dependent upon their running game. But, to me, the Maryland game was somewhat flukish. To beat Tulsa right now is not saying too much. But they didn't do well in the total yardage battle in that game. If you look at those numbers, Drew, you'll see Tulsa ran 50 more plays, 107 plays to 57, and Tulsa outgained Temple 403 to 300. So, like I say, I'm not real sold on Temple as of yet, and I think you'll see a huge bounce back out of Boston College in this game. Last week, what Purdue did to them, especially on the defensive side, the fact that Purdue totally locked Boston College down after what we saw out of Boston College the first 3 weeks of the season. A real surprise. I don't think Temple's going to lock BC down. I'd be more than willing to lay the 13.5 with BC in that game.
Robbie, we got revenge on the mind of Clemson Tigers as they host Syracuse, who was the team that beat them in the regular season last year. Now they're having to lay 25 at home, 67 the total in Clemson on Saturday.
And they got some outside distractions, right?
Yeah.
Kelly Bryant transfers out of there. The quarterback decision was made to put the true freshman Trevor Lawrence in as the starter. And, as soon as Dabo Swinney said that, Kelly Bryant, a consummate player, and he doesn't see any problem as fast as he could say it, Kelly Bryant was transferring out. So you're down to a quarterback here. I don't know that will disrupt Clemson totally, but I do know this, Drew, that the anchor of the Clemson team is that defensive front, and the breakneck pace that Syracuse plays at with Eric Dungy operating the offense very efficiently can slow a lot of offensive lines down. While Clemson's great with their front four, and all four of those guys are going to be playing in the NFL, a lot of people project all four of those guys going in the first round, but it's not especially deep with the same type of talent. There's a drop-off, and when you have to rotate the way they're going to have to rotate against Syracuse, I think that's what caused them trouble last year. I think it could cause them trouble again this year. We may see a noticeable difference in the Clemson offense now with Lawrence at quarterback. I think Dabo Swinney's more than happy to pull the trigger on throwing the ball downfield with Lawrence after what we've seen through 4 games, and probably why he made this decision. So we could see a little bit of fireworks here. When you look at Clemson, the first inclination is always, they're so good defensively they can slow teams down. But this is one of those teams, Syracuse, that style of offense, but more importantly, the quarterback that they have, Eric Dungy, and the skill position people that they have around him. I don't see a lot of Clemson sacks happening here. I don't see a lot of Syracuse Dungy running for his life. I think they get the ball out quick. They could be trouble to Clemson. I don't think they can win the game because certainly their defense, while improved, doesn't stack up to the Clemson defense, but seems like a lot of points to me. Syracuse plus points might be a good way to go, revenge or not.
Robbie, let's head to the Sun Belt. We got USA at ASU. That's South Alabama versus Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina. Looks like App State laying 26.5, 55.5 the total, Robbie.
They've been tremendous so far this year. I mean, to me, and I know you watch a lot of the Sun Belt, so I
actually thought they'd be down this year.
It seemed that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you lose the quarterback Lamb after so many years of running that offense, when you lose Cox at running back, when you lose 88 at linebacker, I'm forgetting his name now, but they had some players down there that, because of graduation, they lost. But they came out of the chute quick against Penn State. We know how good Penn State is now. And there's been no turning back since then. I mean, they demolished Charlotte 45-9, Gardner-Webb 72-7. Now, those two teams, power rating-wise, aren't going to get you too excited. But I think that the quality of offense that Appalachian State is showing so far through 3 games. And, again, we have to revert back to Penn State because that's the only true test. And it's a real acid test when you go up to Happy Valley and push them to overtime. I think that speaks a lot of this team. Don't know that I can say the same about South Alabama, although I will say this. I read all off season long how South Alabama was going to be far more aggressive on the offensive side as far as passing the football is concerned. Now, it hurt them in the offseason when Dallas Davis transferred, and it hurt them when Dallas Davis's backup at quarterback, Cole Garvin, couldn't really take over the reins to the job. But it seems now in Evan Orth that they found a quarterback here, Drew. 69% completions. He's only thrown 1 interception in 96 attempts. So South Alabama has the ability to move the football some. It's going to be the biggest test Appalachian has had since that opener against Penn State because, like I say, the other 2 opponents don't scare you much. This total, for whatever reason, has gone from 64 all the way down to 55.5, 56. Could be some overreaction to what Appalachian's done defensively, but they're going to score their share of points against South Alabama. And my feeling on South Alabama is with Orth at quarterback, they can find their way to 17 or 20 as well. So at some point, I think there's some legitimate take back in that price of 55.5 on the over.
Robbie, let's head to the ACC here. We got Virginia Tech at Duke. This number jumped out at me. We're seeing 4.5s and a couple 5s, 50.5 the total. I'll tell you, I thought Duke would be laying more here. I mean, I know a lot of the marketplace likes to bet on kind of like bounce back opportunities with Virginia Tech going down last week to ODU, but I think Duke's look good. So what am I missing here in this number?
I'm not sure what you're missing. I think that power ratings probably haven't caught up or weren't as aggressive in downgrading Virginia Tech as maybe they could have been, and maybe we're reacting with our eyes a little bit too much off of what we've seen so far. My power ratings show Duke only a 2-point favorite. So to show them opening at 4, moving up to 5, I think that tells us all we need to know, that, again, power ratings probably weren't aggressively shifted against Virginia Tech, although I did move them pretty good. I got to tell you, Drew, I wasn't chintzy on the amount that I pushed Virginia Tech down off of what I saw last week. And then, you have to factor in to this game that Virginia Tech lost their starting quarterback last week. Josh Jackson got carted off. He's out for a while.
So he's not going to play in this for sure.
No, he's not going to play for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a pretty bad leg injury, and he's out for a while. They do have Ryan Willis. He's the guy who came in and relieved him. Came from Kansas. So KU quarterback, their throwing quarterback the last couple of years, came in. He's okay. Josh Jackson, for that matter, Drew, is okay, in my opinion. But he does bring the dimension of dual threat to the table that Willis really doesn't bring. But I'll make it even larger, the losses that they've suffered, because Trevon Hill, arguably their best defensive lineman, gets thrown off the team Sunday morning for whatever, dismissed for violation of team rules or conduct detrimental to the squad or whatever the exact phrase was. But now you lose one of your best defensive linemen, a team that needs pass rush in order to cover up for that secondary. Meanwhile, when Duke lost their starting quarterback Daniel Jones, they just marched right on. And so I'm with you. I don't know exactly what I'm missing, except that perhaps people think Virginia Tech's going to bounce back, and perhaps they think that oddsmakers thought that maybe the line shouldn't be moved as aggressively against, or the power rating shouldn't be moved as aggressively against Virginia Tech. But those are two major losses. A major loss across the defensive front, major loss at quarterback, and I don't know that they recover real quick. Duke probably can put that film in from last week and find an awful lot of holes in that Virginia Tech defense. Bud Foster's got a lot to go over. You just don't give up 600-plus yards to ODU and think, next week we're going to be okay.
Right, let's head back to the Sun Belt. We got ULM at Georgia State. Looks like the Warhawks laying 7.5 in Atlanta versus the Panthers. 62 the total.
Yeah, as far as Sun Belt teams go, I'm a pretty big fan of ULM. I think it's based upon the fact that I like their offense so much. Now, sometimes for me, Drew, it gets a little too horizontal, side to side, and not enough downfield, because I think that they can really stick some passes downfield. But then come games where they do that. So they're a little mix-mash, but they can move it. There's no doubt about it. And Caleb Evans, one of the better quarterbacks in that league, against Georgia State, who's been a real disappointment on the defensive side of the football so far, allowing over 250, both on the ground and through the air. And ULM has no problem running the football either. They'll mix it up to set up the pass. So I think that the Georgia State defense right now in a little bit of trouble in this game. They're going to have to come through with some type of offense, and we haven't seen that so far this year. I know the Monroe defense is easy to attack, but to me, Georgia State right now hasn't shown us. Maybe they come up this week as conference play starts. We do see each year teams that really respond once conference play begins. But for me right now, ULM, the far superior team. Don't know that I would have any trouble in this case playing them. Either do the early bettors. Game moves from 6.5 all the way to 7.5. A couple of 8s that we're staring at right now, one being at Pinnacle, one being at the Greek. I'm in agreement with that line move, and the total here has gone up from 58.5 to 62. To me, Monroe's good for 40 in this contest. We'll see what Georgia State can do.
137-138 UMass Ohio. Looks like 69.5 the total. Ohio, the Bobcats laying 14, 13.5, 13. So some opinion in the marketplace, but we'll go with 14 at Chris. How would you look to bet UMass Ohio, Robbie?
Well, I think overall, certainly Ohio used the superior team here, Drew. I don't think there's any question about that. Just from a power ratings perspective, though, because Ohio U hasn't played up to expectations so far this year, power ratings made them only 10. So you have to lay a little extra, in my opinion. You have to lay a little extra if you like Ohio U here. But I don't think that the matchup helps Massachusetts much in this game. Last week, a lot of questions to start the contest. Who was going to play quarterback? The top two quarterbacks for UMass were hurt. Well, you know what? Michael Curtis played that game, the third-string quarterback, and they were out of the chute 28-0 right away. Andrew Ford, Russ Comas, I think you'll probably see one of those two guys this week, but it's the UMass defense that really would bother me in this contest and would have me leaning toward the Ohio U team. I think Frank Solich's offense balanced enough to shred the UMass defense, and I think that in his case as a defensive coach, I think he'll have more than enough ready for that Massachusetts pass offense, which sometimes can go dormant, as good as it is. And I love Mark Whipple, maybe one of my favorite play callers across the country, the head coach of UMass, but they can go silent at times offensively. Last week was a big breakout game. I don't think that happens here, even though the power ratings say it's a higher price than I'd like to lay. I think Ohio used the right way to go here.
Robbie, we got 139, 140 Pitt at UCF. Big one here for UCF. They need this in a big way. 13 they're laying at home in Orlando, 65 the total.
I'm so interested in taking the Pitt side here, Drew. The one thing that makes me nervous about taking Pitt and the near two touchdowns, I think it's 13.5, 14 maybe. I'm not staring at it right this second, but I believe that's what they were getting in this contest. Like Kenny Pickett in the offense, what bothers me is 91 degrees and 94% humidity. It gets the best of all teams down there unless you're so deep that it doesn't affect you. But Pittsburgh doesn't fall into that category of so deep that 94% humidity and 91 degrees isn't going to bother them. Central Florida plays to that. Every time they have somebody down there in Orlando, Mackenzie Milton's been phenomenal. The only thing that bothers me about this team still, and I think their results are somewhat fraudulent because of it, is their defense, in my estimation, still not where it needs to be. Everybody talks about the unbeaten streak, and it's great, fantastic. But to me, that defense last year, even though it was shredded at times, I think that defense was better than what we're looking at this year. And I think that what Central Florida has been able to do so far this year is more a product of the opposition than it is really any increase in defensive capability. I think Pitt can take a lot of advantage of that Central Florida defense as long as they don't wilt in the fourth quarter. 13.5 to me is huge, and I think Pittsburgh's capable of winning this game straight up. Never mind plus 13.5. So Mackenzie Milton and company, they're going to see their toughest defensive test of the year. They're going to see their toughest offense that they faced all season long. And for me, like I say, as long as Pitt's ready and they're not cramping up all over the place and coming off the field because of the speed of the UCF offense, I think 13.5 is probably too much.
All right, looking to fade UCF. Interesting, Robbie. We got 141, 142 South Carolina versus surprising Kentucky team. We got 51 the total with the Kentucky Wildcats, looks like laying 1.5 or 2 in Lexington. How would you look to bet this SEC clash?
Yeah, change in favorites. A little surprising, right? But how about UK? I mean, the win over Florida was big. It took that 33-year monkey off their back or whatever it was.
Yeah, you're right. But the bigger one was Mississippi State.
And I mean, the fact that they beat them physically, Drew, which I would have never expected. Joe Morehead, the head coach of Mississippi State, was none too happy for anybody who saw that post-game press conference. None too happy with his team's performance and looked pretty adamant that Mississippi State will get things fixed this week. But let's credit Kentucky first. I mean, what Mark Stoops has done with that defense, never mind the offense for a minute, but the defense and the fact that they can man up and play physical with a team as physical as Mississippi State and, like I say, simply dominate them in that contest. It's a real achievement for this team and how far the program has come. The next step beyond that is the physicality of the offensive line. I think you and I had this game in the podcast last week, and we talked about how Benny Snell said he could run on an NFL team. And I'm thinking to myself, this defensive front is no joke. I don't know if you want to say that. Well, Benny Snell could say whatever he wants because they ran up, down, through, and over Mississippi State last week. So the real question becomes, how does Kentucky handle success? They haven't had success like this in a long time. Are they just becoming one of those teams that, roll from Saturday to Saturday and pick right up where they left off and play another solid game and win again against another good team coming in, a divisional foe in South Carolina? Will Muschamp's going to have something to say about that this week? As sharp a defensive mind as there is in football, college football right now, and I'm sure that they'll be well drilled in being physical against this Kentucky rushing attack. Terry Wilson brings an added dimension to the Kentucky offense, no doubt about it. The fact that you have to be afraid of him using his legs, that helps the Kentucky offense. I think they can only get better. This is a real good matchup, Drew, and I don't know that I could play it either way. I'm surprised at the immediate shift, the field goal move towards the Kentucky side. Perhaps people thought Kentucky should have been the slight favorite to begin with. And at 1.5, it's not that big of a move. But the opinion, like you say, is there with Kentucky right away. And I'm just not positive that they're that much better than South Carolina. This becomes far more of a situational play to me than a fundamental. If I watch this game and it becomes a fundamental victory for Kentucky, in other words, a game where their offensive line blows South Carolina off the line of scrimmage, a game where their defensive front creates havoc like they did last week, then we got to really make a severe change. I like where Kentucky's headed right now, and I'm all, just about all in on them, but you'd really be all in if they pull this one off, because Deebo Samuel, Jake Bentley, all the weapons that South Carolina has, we'll see if they press them and go up tempo to try and wear them down. I think that would be a tactic that I would deploy against the Kentucky team. Certainly South Carolina's got that in their arsenal, so we'll see what offensive coordinator McClendon does. Won't play it. Be very, very good to watch, though. That's why it's a primetime game, SEC, this week.
We got one game left, Robbie. And, guys, before we get to it, make sure to check out Rob Veno on Sportsmemo.com. Year-to-date, up almost 10 units, college football and NFL. Also up over 20 units in MLB year-to-date. So check out his work at Sportsmemo.com. Discounts all over the place, yearly, monthly, weekly, just a pick, whatever you want at Sportsmemo.com. Last game here, Robbie, 143-144 Virginia, NC State. Looks like the Wolfpack laying 5 at home. Virginia, NC State total 54.5. How would you look to bet this one?
Yeah, the big win for NC State last week. Go to Marshall. Ryan Finley, good again. Ryan Finley, one of those quarterbacks that's way up the draft board, top 3 or 4, no matter, depends upon where you're looking. But it becomes a pretty good quarterback matchup here, because it seems like UVA, who has changed their offense for the third time in the Bronco Mendenhall tenure, looks like they found a quarterback in Bryce Perkins here. A dual threat QB, averaging over 5 yards a carry, completing 66% of his passes. I mean, all of a sudden, Virginia is a legitimate offensive squad, and I know Louisville's down and they have all kinds of quarterback issues, but Virginia really shut Louisville down from start to finish last week in that contest. So real good performance. I think UVA's on the uptick. I don't know that they're all around better than NC State. You have to like what you've seen out of NC State's offense. I'll say this, Drew. To start the year, I had thought that NC State lost so much defensive talent that there's no way, especially on that front four, led by Bradley Chubb, I thought there's no way that they could play that type of defense this year. But if you just look at the points that they're allowing so far, they've been really good, almost as good. To me, at some point, that's going to change, and I wonder if Bryce Perkins and company start that this week. I was interested in the Virginia total last week. I might be interested in the Virginia total again. I think there's still a perception about Virginia as a team, all defense, no offense, that gets us some value when playing overs. NC State, we know, can score. So that may be a way I look. I'm still looking into it. But a real good matchup here. And like I say, credit to Mendenhall and Robert Anai, the offensive coordinator, who is just so easily adaptable to any spread offense because he's coached underneath air raid head coaches. He's coached underneath Rich Rod and his run-oriented spread. He's diverse. He could do a lot, and certainly he's done a lot with this offense now with a dual-threat quarterback this year.
Robbie, anything else you want to throw out before we shut this down?
I don't know, buddy. I think that we're going to be back tomorrow, so I'll say that. Hey, listen up tomorrow because we'll come back with another portion of the college football card. Every game on the board. Sportsmemo, the only place that does it.
Yeah, we'll be back tomorrow, guys, right around noon, 12 Eastern with Teddy Covers and Rob Veno finishing up the college football Every Game on the Board podcast. Make sure to check out sportsmemo.com for all your betting needs. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you tomorrow.